Hello there.
Hello.
All right, we are recording and we are live. So whenever you're ready to open the meeting, Chair McGriff, we are ready for you.
All right. I'll use my unofficial gavel to call the meeting to order. So welcome everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, April 19th, 2021 special urban renewal meeting. And I want to welcome everyone. Our fans, detractors, and everyone who loves urban renewal as much as I do. So welcome to the meeting tonight. We have one item on the agenda, and before we get to that, I would like to ask for a roll call, please.
Absolutely. Commissioner Doug Neely.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Sean Cross.
Here.
And Chair Denise McGriff.
Present. So we have an official quorum, and thank you again, everyone and commissioners, for making time for this special meeting. We normally don't meet on Monday, but we have one topic, which is something we've all been anxious to hear the report. And it is a discussion item of an alternatives analysis of our urban renewal study. And I will turn it over to both City Manager Tony Conkle and Economic Development Manager James Graham for their brief introduction. And then we have our consultants with us tonight.
Thank you, Chair McGriff. I'll just go ahead and get us started I'll just turn it over to James, and he can introduce Leland and give any other additional background information that he would like.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Good evening, Madam President McGriff, Madam Mayor, for the first time at this meeting. Also, members of the Urban Renewal Commission, and ladies and gentlemen. Since August 2020, the consultant team led by Leland Consulting has engaged the general public and stakeholders through a variety of venues designed to educate and answer questions. Tonight, we are poised to discuss the disposition of urban renewal, and in so doing, examine the alternative scenarios that will decide the future of urban renewal in Oregon City. Do we retain urban renewal as it is? Do we keep urban renewal and increase its frozen base? Or do we close the district altogether? With us is Aeneas Mates from 3J Consulting, Andy Parks from Gel, Oregon, and certainly not last but not least, Sam Brookham from the Leland Consulting Group, to whom I will turn the presentation over to.
Thank you, James. Pleased to be here, everybody. Excuse me. Don't know what just happened to my throat. I have a number of slides, and I know I anticipate a pretty robust conversation about this, so I'll try and move quickly so we can get to the exciting part. And I think I'll pause probably at the end of a few sections. We do want to give you a quick update. It's been a couple of months probably since we were last in front of you, so a couple of things have happened since we've had a meeting with the Business Alliance and a number of meetings with quote unquote urban renewal opponents. So I'll share my screen now, and I'll get jamming with the presentation. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. So really just to recap here, the purpose of this meeting is to determine whether there's a path forward for urban renewal in Oregon City, just as James mentioned. So a few things on that. We want to just revisit what this project process really was, recap the last meeting and how we've addressed those things that we talked about last, debrief that Business Alliance presentation, give you a few of the key findings from the opponents outreach that we did, and then the bulk of it is really that second to last piece, the alternatives analysis that we'll spend most of our time talking about. So once again, this is really 3 phases, and we've come to the end here into that final phase where it really comes back to you to make that decision. We've pretty much wrapped up with that second phase, which is the facilitated discussion and analysis. So really, once again, that the goal of the project was really the goal of this, or the purpose of this meeting, that they're pretty well aligned. Some of the questions we were hoping to answer were, should the city close the district? If it retained, how could we choose to use the monies accumulated? What is the possible project list? And then pros and cons of closing or expanding. So, getting into some of the options. Just to quickly recap our last meeting, when we presented a few things, a few of y'all wanted to, felt it beneficial to revisit the current plan, talking about things like deficiencies, project types, etc., as well as what is that desired vision for the district. We focused on overlapping taxing districts and what some of the timeline expectations are in other districts, other jurisdictions. Talked a little bit about at what point should we re-engage the overlapping taxing districts, and then the elephant in the room, which is always school funding. Also on the educational side, talked a little bit about successes and business specific examples that we talked with, especially with the Business Alliance meeting that James was very helpful in helping us prep for as well. As well as the main thing there is talking to the urban renewal opponents. So we'll give you a little debrief on what came out of those. And once again, the options and alternatives for the district. What are they? What are the pros and cons? The goal, recognizing that it's really about getting community support, and then the messaging. Here's how we intend to use it. Here are the impacts of closing it. So really, if we use this as a little bit of a framework, this is what we've been working on over the past month or so. So in terms of the current plan, I felt it beneficial to revisit this. There's a lot of talk about what is urban renewal and what is it, and what is the vision of urban renewal in Oregon City, and realistically, the vision of urban renewal is whatever the vision is of the city and the plans for which it is implementing. So in the case of the current plan, what we're talking about is the city's current comprehensive plan and the Oregon City Futures Report that was created in 2004. Recognizing that the 3J is currently helping the city to update its current comprehensive plan. So the urban renewal plan, back as written, was intended to be amended as needed in order to remain consistent with the comp plan. So just an important distinction there. Some of the things that come out from that update might well be things that we want to revisit with the urban renewal district in downtown. Once again, don't want to focus on this, but the number 2 really is one of I think probably one of the more significant goals of these 3. Improving the urban renewal area is intended to be result in a commercial and employment center and stimulate private development within the area. So we've talked a lot about over the past several months, about urban renewal and whether it should be more community driving more community amenities, or whether it should be more private investment and driving return on investment. And so as far as the latter goes, we're talking about stimulating private development here and getting that return on investment. And then also to fulfill Metro Region's 2040 growth concepts. So that in itself has a number of different components that urban renewal was, this urban renewal plan was intended to help fulfill. So just to give you a quick, we had a really good presentation with the Business Alliance. I believe we had about 30 to 40 people attend from the business community. I won't focus on the presentation itself. What I will focus on is a couple of polls that were taken. I don't know if any of you have had the chance to to see that or understand what was asked, but there's 3 specific questions. First of which is, do you believe that urban renewal financing as it exists today is a beneficial resource for economic development? And you can see that overwhelmingly all but 3 of the 25 respondents said yes, very much so. The second question that was asked was, if a project needs urban renewal assistance to develop the landfill, do you see this as a good investment for the city? And 13 said yes, definitely. 5 said possibly, but unsure. And a few more were didn't answer, obviously. So these were questions that were asked from the facilitator rather than posed by us. But I figured it was good to pass on. Good information, good context. And the third, if urban renewal could provide additional parking in downtown Oregon City around the Blue Heron Mill site, would you support it? This was a little bit more split. Some needed more information, but more were supported than anything else. So parking is a little bit more specific, obviously, but I think sort of in order of importance, that first question is probably the most pertinent.
Sam, the slide didn't change. The third question didn't come up on the slide.
I think you lost me.
The PowerPoint didn't give us that last one.
Okay, sorry. I got my internet connection is unstable message. So, 1 second. Did you?
There was no corresponding slide with the statement about the Blue Heron parking structure.
Okay, so you should
There
be
you
seeing.
go. It's there now.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
don't know what happened. Yes, so this was just the third question. It was a little bit more specific about parking, but again, a little bit more hesitation. But generally speaking, the respondents said yes, it's a good use of the funding resource for parking. And I see Rocky Smith has raised his hand. So Rocky, do you have a question?
Yeah, so on each of the 2 previous slides, there were only 2 choices for them to select. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, polls are only as good as we direct people. And so it's curious why even the 2 choices on both previous slides were possibly or yes, and there was no no. And then you put the no in there for the parking structure, which, you know, so even there's no option there to get really the full story. There's no other. So you're really forcing people to say possibly when maybe that's really not or yes.
I'm sorry, Rocky.
Which are both pros.
I'll have to revisit the poll outcomes. I just generated this from an Excel output of all recorded answers. So there probably was a no, and I think I recall there being a no now.
Well, that's important for us to know that, because I mean, then it should be listed as a 0.
Yes, I agree.
Frank, Commissioner O'Donnell, you have a comment or a question?
Well, I do. I actually I watched that presentation to OCBA. I do think there were other categories. They do need to be included. If there were 40 attendees, obviously we're getting 50% people answering. The other caution I would have about this specific study is the narrow focus of the group that was being surveyed. I mean, this is like asking people who make minimum wage, do you think the minimum wage should be boosted? And not asking anybody else like employers or anything else. So, and also the quality of the questions. For example, the Blue Heron parking, that's talking about putting a parking site right next to Blue Heron. Maybe if it was a parking site in general where they parked more toward the north end of town and had to walk through our town and visit our other businesses and possibly patronize them, you might have gotten a better answer. So the survey, as Commissioner Smith spoke out, is only as good as the way it's phrased. And my point is the survey only has value when considered considering the group that you did survey. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't have the raise hand function on my side.
I see your hand, Inez.
I also just wanted to remind folks that these questions were generated from the OCBA facilitator. And Sam, maybe you can speak a little bit to who was in the room and who was running the meeting that night, or just what the premise of that presentation was.
Is that
Yeah, so
you all would like to know more of, or are we ready to move on?
Well, if we're getting data that is supposed to tell us something, then we should know it. If it's not, then move on, because clearly.
I'm not sure this is really telling us anything. I think your comments were very well taken.
Right.
The question is very poorly worded, and again, Commissioner O'Donnell hit the nail on the head. It's the group that it was given to, and thank you for bringing this to our attention, but I'm just going to take it for what it's worth.
mhm.
As will I. I frequently attend those meetings. I know the composition of the audience. It is a very narrow segment of the Oregon City population. Thanks.
So I think it sounds, Sam, like we're going to move on.
Yes.
Sounds great. Well, the opposite end of the spectrum, I suppose you couldn't get more different here. We had a couple of conversations with some opponents of urban renewal, some well-known opponents of urban renewal, Craig Danielson and John Williams. We reached out extensively, or Anais attempted to reach out to a number of others to little response, but the conversations we have with John and Craig were highly productive. So just to run through a few things here, I'm going to go step by step. Some of the key takeaways of those were they weren't necessarily opposed to urban renewal. They were opposed to the way in which it has been used. The first thing here I'd like to elaborate on is in response to this first point, which I think is probably all-encompassing. They talked about putting the plan out to a vote and how that would likely address many of the objections. This one included they have, and that many communities gain voter approval for urban renewal authorities as well. So the next is just that, essentially. If they, in response to the charter, if the voters passed the charter amendment that required voter approval for the city to issue any debt, so the URA was created by the city as a separate entity, and that entity issued debt without a vote of Oregon City voters. So addressing that through a vote, I think that's what I just mentioned in the previous bullet. The next piece is that money, they had objections to money going to smaller projects or incremental business improvements that don't necessarily create property tax growth in the same way that those large development systems projects do. So they would prefer projects that would broaden the tax base and shorten the time frame of the district. On a similar note, the urban renewal owned property. There's a few instances in the district that where the URA owns property. So they didn't think that the URA should be in the property management business, or that those properties should be used as an income stream. Rather that these properties should be used to grow the tax base. Again, a little bit more of a higher level umbrella statement here, that in terms of the structure and organization of urban renewal in Oregon City. They mentioned that the URA had previously had a board of non-elects to carry out the plan, and supports revisiting this structure. And then in terms of the overlapping overlapping taxing districts, they said that fire districts are typically supportive of urban renewal if closed within 10 to 15 years, not if it goes on for 20 to 30. Now, of course, I'd like to add that caveat that we talked with the fire district, and we've had those conversations, as have, I'm sure, many of you, and there's some truth in that, but at the same time, there's a little bit more nuance. And of course, that there are opportunities to revisit the plan, as I think comes as no surprise to anybody. So recognizing that the city currently has $20 to $40 million in debt capacity, and suggesting that the commission should be prospecting for ways to find projects to spend that money and generate increment growth for the right projects. Okay, let me put, before I move on, let me pause there and see if there's any quick questions.
Well, Rachel Smith, please.
Commissioner McGriff. So my question is about the charter and supports putting the urban renewal plan out to a vote. So that seems problematic, just because we've had, the prior initiative that went out to a vote about closing the urban renewal district. And is there clarity or a distinction between what these folks were asking for as to whether or not it's legal? In other words, I would never support putting something out to a vote where the result of the vote didn't have any legal basis, which was essentially the problem that we had last time. And it created this, all kinds of problems and, legal cases. And so it seems like maybe there's a fine line there. So maybe you could specify or clarify, were they asking, if we were to take something out to a vote, what would we be asking them for approval? Is it a set of projects? Is it not whether or not they like urban renewal? Because we've already had that legal discussion as to whether urban renewal agency is legal and can stand separate from the city rule. It's in state statute. So anyway, do you have any more clarity on that? I feel like we're kind of walking this tightrope there.
Yeah, and perhaps Andy, you can jump in here after I say my piece. But before we had these conversations, we had been talking about this a little bit internally as well, given the the challenges of the city charter as it currently stands. And I think what we're talking about when it comes to putting it out to a vote, it being the plan, not going out for a vote until the city and the commissioners had adequate time to revisit the plan, revisit those projects, revisit the vision that's been put forth in some of these other planning efforts and they're currently ongoing in the city. And then having a deliberate strategy, whether that's through a PAC or something similar, to get that message out there. So it is construed and designed in a way that is a little bit more inherently community driven. So I think that's generally speaking, that's what's being talked about. And Andy, I think, do you want to jump in here and add anything else?
Yeah, sure, Sam. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think first thing I want to say, make sure we have this on the record, is we're not attorneys, we're not legal counsel, we're not giving any type of legal advice. in it, as Sam indicated, this would be the plan that would go to the vote. And as Sam mentioned also, that might, just want to reemphasize, many communities in Oregon do take their urban renewal plans to their community for approval before they create the district. And, a recent example of that is the city of Corvallis with their, South Corvallis urban renewal plan. I think, starting early on with this project, one of the, issues was, does the community support urban renewal? And we don't know the answer to that, based on, I'd go even with the vote, there was no campaign that I'm aware of by anyone in support of urban renewal. There's one letter and there's a lot of opposition. If you're going to stay in urban renewal, you would certainly want to have a committee or appoint somebody, or somebody would have to get involved with actually advocating for the plan and moving forward with the plan. Is there any legal requirement right now for Oregon City, to take this out to a vote? No, there isn't that we're aware of. Again, this was the opposition saying, had there been a plan and the voters had approved the plan, that would have set forth the ability to move forward with that plan. And this becomes a way to have the community be aware of what is going on. And with that, maybe a little less controversy as you're moving through making, decisions that involve issuing debt.
Okay. Well, thanks for answering the question. I'll hold my thoughts on what I think about that idea, but we're not really, I think, at that point. But so thanks for the information.
I think we'll have a chance to talk about it. So I'm not sure if whether Urban Renewal Commissioner Smith or Urban Renewal Commissioner O'Donnell had their hand up first, so you guys can duke it out. Rocky?
Okay. That was an easy win. Okay. My question is about so where it talks about not being in the property management business. The way that you read that, it kind of implied meaning that, as you stated, or be used as an income stream. It kind of linked those together, but aren't those two separate things? I mean, I'm wondering how much discussion really was about this concern of an income stream, and was that, I think that's actually separate from the actual project or property management piece. I think, from my knowledge and concern from people in the past, is this idea that we use urban renewal funds for staff and staff time, and within kind of the city budget and urban renewal budget. And did that come up in terms of this concern about using urban renewal for an income stream? Because clearly we've spent money out of urban renewal since the vote that was beyond kind of what I think that expectation of the vote was, which has put some of us commissioners in a predicament. I voted no on pretty much all city budgets since then, and all urban renewal budgets since then. So I wonder, that's still a concern to me, that piece of urban renewal funds being used for staffing or hours or things that are beyond the scope of actual projects.
Sure, O'Donnell.
There's a multitude of things to answer here. So I'll start with what Commissioner Smith just said. The opponents, such as the esteemed John Williams, will say that the only thing that urban renewal money can be used for is the service of debt only. And yet some of the guidelines on urban renewal say that if you don't have a staff that can conduct the business of urban renewal, you can dedicate monies for that, almost like you're contracting for another staff to provide that which you would normally have. I'll leave that comment at that. I'd like to go through the other things because I'm pretty well versed on them. What you hear from those opponents of urban renewal is if it were project-based, if we were putting a project in front of the community, then they could vote on that as a proper expenditure of urban renewal funds. I think, and I'll say this because I led urban renewal for a number of years and sat on the city commission for almost 5 years now. I think that we, as leaders of this community, we need to formulate a plan on what we want the city to look like, involving those properties that we currently control. And those properties would have precedence over properties that are not controlled by us, whereas the developers maybe have an option to buy or would like to get involved in it. I think we've failed in that respect. And I think we're taking measures to correct that. I think OC 2040 could be an answer to that. I think when you start talking about like the Abernathy area, what do we want that to look like? Where do we want to spend our money and how do we want to spend it? But what is the product we want in the end? And in the end, what do we want as a commission and an urban renewal and as a community, this city to look like? And how will we use those properties that we own? I'm going to give Sam and the others some time to think about this question because it follows up on Mayor Lyle Smith's question. If you, as our consultants, were to phrase a question to be put in front of the voting public, how would that question read? Keeping in mind that, you know, the approval is usually about, tell me about a project and we'll tell you if we're in agreement with it. I do agree with some of the things, that information that was gathered, the avoidance of smaller incremental projects, because everybody knows that taking bare land generates the greatest incremental growth in your tax return and your ability to increase value. The property management piece is a bit misleading. Property is bought with the expectation of using it for a future use, a certain use. So I don't see anything. We're really not in the property management business, although maybe we've let those things drag on too long, both the city commission and urban renewal. But sometimes goals have changed and property has been bought for a reason, and that reason has changed. In the interim, not that we want to be in property management, but I don't think it's bad business to garner offsetting monies to help our financial position. So I view property management as an interim solution until we get to use the property for what we want. As far as non-elected on the boards, I struggle with that. I struggle with it just like I struggle with bureaucrats, because in the end, who is responsible to the people of the community are those they elect and can unelect. And I don't mind having non-electeds as participants in the board. But in the end, the decision makers need to be able to be held responsible by their community, and that comes by a vote of the people. So I know I just spoke a whole bunch about a whole bunch of subjects, but I really think that in the end, I don't know how we would phrase a question in the absence of saying, we would like to formulate these projects, send out a request for proposals, as opposed to how we've been doing business, which is people come and approach us and tell us what they'd like to do, which may or may not fit in the total plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I raised my own hand because I thought that was proper format. Commissioner Neely or Commissioner Cross, do you have anything that you'd like to add to what we've heard on all the slides so far? Before I say anything, I'd like to give you the opportunity.
Commissioner Neely, you're on mute.
I have to move my cursor because I can't see Doug, but I'm going to flip him up here. So there he is.
Yeah, the issue of whatever projects we support ought to be those on properties we own. I basically disagree with that. I think we have to look at the properties that are truly blighted, and I think we have some that are truly blighted. One of them we own. Well, I'd argue that that's the case too on where the Clackamas land supply is. When there's truly blighted, but there is a property owner there that wants to develop that property, and it won't be developed otherwise, I think the funds can be used for that purpose. The only one that I can think of that's on for us right now is the landfill project, but if Blue Heron comes into play, that's a very, very challenging piece, and I'm not sure that a private entity could really develop to the full value that we would like to see in terms of taxable property.
Thank you. Commissioner Cross?
No, I don't have anything. All the other questions have pretty much been asked that I had, so.
Well, I am going to I'm not interested in refuting any of what we heard or what Sam has indicated. What I'm going to do is speak to my experience in managing a couple of urban renewal districts. And that is where the base of my comments will come from. Many of you already know that the current plan in its current configuration and wording is not something that I support, and I support us redoing that plan so that it more broadly reflects what it is that we want to do. I support and encourage and have worked on this. Many of the projects that I have worked on in the past have been both small projects which do incrementally create property tax growth. The big projects take a significant amount of time, effort, years, many years. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And my previous experience is that you have a mix of both of those types of projects. You focus on the smaller, as James would describe them, as low-hanging fruit. You put efforts into the larger project that meets the intent of the plan, meets the goals of the particular district, and you work on that. Financing does not happen overnight. It takes considerable amount of work and effort, and you need staff to do that. Having been staff for the Interstate Urban Renewal District, the Central East Side Urban Renewal District, and the Lents Urban Renewal District, and having worked in River District and downtown, you need staff to do the work. It isn't going to happen without staff. So that is not even an option to consider, and as my understanding, and it's not an option that I would support. The urban renewal properties in all of the plans that I worked on were purchased to land bank them for future projects or assembly. They were the first priority. I believe that we should work, as Commissioner O'Donnell said, on the properties that we own. We need to have a list, a small vision, goals, what we want. I do not support the constant knocking on our door saying we'd like to do this. And I will have to say, because many of the people are now deceased, so I can say this with a clear conscience, I never as staff supported the McDonald's project that we did. They split that property in half. It is, both sides of it are unusable, and that was a mistake that we made. And so now we have to live with it. In terms of having additional people on the board, I've worked under urban renewal commissions where they were entirely the commission or the council. And the last one I worked for was all appointed people by the city of Portland. They were, A-list, B-list type people who had experience in a variety of areas. They were diverse in their professions as well as their ethnicity, and a nice ratio of men to women. We did work with our local fire district at the city of Portland's fire department, not necessarily a district, but we worked with the different school districts that we encountered, which was Portland and a little bit of David Douglas, to work with them. So I support, us revisiting our plan. I support the direction that Commissioner O'Donnell talked about, is that we need to focus on what we already own. And, if they doesn't serve our purpose, then of course we would look at selling it or doing something else. But we have, some work ahead of us to do. And again, putting an urban renewal plan out to a vote is such a vague, broad topic that it's not anything we can get our arms around. And I think we need to have further discussion about that. In its current configuration, I wouldn't put our plan out. And I don't think that I want to do a page by page or playbook by playbook of well, I like this project or I don't like this project. It's not about whether the project is whether we like it. It's whether it makes sense for the urban renewal plan that we are going to have and whether or not it meets the goals and policies that we as an urban renewal commission have established. That's what the test should be. It's not a beauty contest. So with that, I will just stop based on my own experience of over 17 years of working in urban renewal. And obviously, I support it because I believe that it works. And I believe that we have an opportunity to turn things around and make this plan be what we want it to be. Mr. Bookham, you ready to move on? Or we're done with that and we're going to have more discussion? I think we lost him. James?
I think he's still here. Hold on.
Yeah, I don't see him. Oh, there he is. Now you're at the top. You came to the top, Sam, of my screen.
There he is.
I think he's frozen.
I think he's frozen. Sam, you need to turn off your video maybe.
Yeah, he is. He's frozen for sure. Yeah, he turned it
Can
off.
everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just barely.
Do you have?
We all love technology so much.
Oh,
Okay. there-
Okay.
oh, he's back.
Don't worry
Sorry
about
about
it.
this.
That's all right. You're
It
not
is
in
the-
control of the internet.
Joys of, yes, we thought this would be over, right? But it is what it is.
Oh, it's just the
Fiber
internet.
fiber optics would have helped you, Sam, there. Fiber optics would have helped you there.
Oh, boy.
Perfect. Well, Commissioner McGriff, you set me up very well before I disappeared into the void. Because in terms of our what we've explored for our alternatives analysis, I think it's pretty simple. Just to come back to the project process and what we need to get to before anything else is decided or any other things talked about is does the city want to use urban renewal? And so this is a very simple decision tree. If yes, does the current plan meet the current needs? Yes or no? And this is exactly what you were just talking about. If it doesn't want to use urban renewal going forwards, then there's really only one answer there, and it's to close the district. So if we stick on the left, does the current plan meet the current needs? Well, if yes, then retain the district as is. I don't think what we're hearing generally is that it does not. So that's probably going to stipulate that an amendment to the plan happens. If for whatever reason it is seen to meet the current needs, then and it's retained as is, then that's an option to put the plan out to a vote. I thought I put optional there. Must be a different version. But in terms of amending the plan, we've talked about these options in detail at length in previous meetings and throughout this process. There's a number of options here. I've highlighted increasing the frozen base as a separate piece there because it really is it makes a significant impact beyond what some of these other elements do. So other amendments might be adding a termination date, changing the projects, and adjusting the boundary. So if
Can I
we,
ask you a quick question before you go forward?
yes,
So I think you need something in between retain as the district and amend the plan. So when you say amend the plan, that means certain thing to me as an urban renewal professional. What I think the box in between needs to be is to not amend the plan, because an amendment to me means either we're changing the boundary or we're adding more assessed valuation. We're changing the amount of indebtedness. So I think there's this box in the center between the yes and the no to rewrite the plan or update the plan. so that it meets the current needs. And then the second question would be, do we want to amend the plan to adjust the boundary or change the assessed valuation or add a termination date? So there's actually 2 or 3 more questions that need to be added instead of just the 2. It's not yes or no. There's kind of, I think, a middle section there.
Okay. I hear that.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. And it looks like Frank O'Donnell just raised his hand.
Yeah, I can see Doug and his screen lit up, but I don't, hang on a second, Commissioner. There we go. Okay. Mr. O'Donnell, sir.
Well, I'd agree with what Commissioner McGriff said. The question on the current plan is not only does it meet, does it exceed the current needs? There's an argument about we continue to collect at this high rate of collection and continue to build a war chest when there's no pending projects. And that's an arguable point by the opponents. Possibilities do include altering the frozen base. The termination date piece has been a point of contention where opponents do not like a never-ending story, and I don't blame them. I mean, we should be able to accomplish something or not accomplish it within a specified date. If we don't, we close that district, we can reopen it in modified form. So having no termination date, I don't agree with that approach. The boundary adjustment is kind of, as we spoke, it has to be 1% or less, which is like 8.9 acres. So, and we can't impact that any other way. Even if we downsize the current, it doesn't add to our ability to move the boundary elsewhere. We can't take 10 out and put 10 in plus 1% is my understanding. So if that's any of that is wrong or misspoke, please correct me.
Okay, so here's the official long title. So Urban Renewal Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith / Mayor Rachel Lyle Smith. Please go ahead.
Sam, my question is related to what Commissioner McGriff asked about. Would her proposal of the plan, would that just be would that be considered a plan amendment? I know there's minor and major amendments. Would that be considered in the no category and under the amend the plan option?
Yes, and any changes to the plan, basically stopping short of shutting down the district and just starting over, would be considered an amendment, minor or major or otherwise.
Okay.
Technically and legally speaking.
Well, I'll have to ask Andy this question, because when we rewrote part of the Central East Side Urban Renewal Plan, we didn't change any of the things in it per se, but we rewrote it to the fact that it would have, here's a property that was in the plan. It was listed in the plan, but we added, brought stuff together that was in the plan that wasn't near that property and said, okay, this pertains to this property. We moved stuff around, but essentially it was the same plan. We did end up adding, taking some property out and adding more property. That we felt was a minor amendment, and that's where we went to make the amendments through the City of Portland's process and talk to our Urban Renewal Commission. But basically taking the same plan without making substantial amendment, I guess that's not been my experience. So,
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing. If I'm understanding the discussion correctly, I think what Sam's indicating is if you make a change, whether that's a project that you're adding that wasn't on there before and then reducing the cost or eliminating another project, that would be a change, a minor amendment, I believe, by definition within the Oregon City Renewal Plan. There's just a few items that are substantial plan amendments, And those would be those that, add more than 1% of the boundary and those that increase the maximum indebtedness. I don't think a change to the projects, even adding a termination date, or even changing the amount of the frozen base would be considered a substantial plan amendment. I believe those would all be, fall under the category of minor amendments and, can be done fairly administratively. But yeah, so I think, high level, two major pieces would be substantial, type things that in those substantial things, they just create other things that could happen or impact the agency's ability to stay on track. Let's say an example with increase the maximum indebtedness, you would then fall under new legislation that deals with capping how much of the overall tax base can be moved into urban renewal, that like 12.5% or 1.25%. I can't remember the exact number, but there's a limitation, right, that happens if you change the maximum indebtedness.
Yeah.
But if you kept that the same, the plan would operate much like it does now. And you certainly have, as Commissioner O'Donnell mentioned earlier, you have the ability each year to levy the maximum amount of tax increment or anything below that amount, right? I mean, if you don't want to levy, you don't have to levy. It wouldn't change your maximum indebtedness. It would just, be less dollars that you would have available, say, in cash to carry something out. But, your district has, as Sam indicated earlier, a substantial debt capability right now. You have a lot of capacity. That capacity would be strengthened, I believe, if you did have a plan that was approved by voters. And, the reason for that would be the people that are lending the money would have more confidence that it wouldn't be, the debt itself would not be challenged, which, is, something that, you still, I think, have some risk of that, presently. But, that's
Well,
another
yes,
issue for another day.
Yeah, you essentially said what I said. So
Yep.
Commissioner Cross, I think I saw your hand up earlier before Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Andy to explain the financial impacts of a major amendment. I mean, he already covered it where you start getting limited and that kind of stuff. So it would make us, the district would go on much longer to close it down.
Right.
If we did that. So
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell.
Mr. Park's comments were very helpful because I was trying to specifically understand three things. Could we alter the frozen base? This is all keeping it under minor amendments, okay? Are these all minor amendments? Could we alter the frozen base? Can we certainly change the amount we choose to collect each year? Can we establish a termination date on the existing plan? And certainly we can do a boundary adjustment less than 1%. Are those all minor adjustments that don't get us into a whole other arena?
I believe so. It would be something that, would want to run by, a bond counsel, make sure that they were agreeable to that. But I believe that each of those would be a minor amendment and not mess with your collection abilities and, bring in other factors, new legislation.
Right. I feel the same way. Thank you.
Comments to make before we move on? We're doing really great with our discussion. Sorry, the mute just jumped back on again. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Neely.
I guess the question that we don't collect the full amount. I mean, we get all the taxes on those properties, so I'm not sure what that means. I mean, we'll get the taxable amount coming into the urban renewal district for the land we have. How would we reduce it other than reducing the land?
Yeah, Commissioner, if the urban renewal agency chose to collect, let's just say 1/2 of the maximum amount that you had levy authority for, you would just collect 1/2. The other half would end up going to the overlapping taxing jurisdictions.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what happened with the amendments that came to the plans, the districts that I was working in. They made an agreement with the other taxing districts that some of that money would come back to them right away, so they weren't collecting everything. All right, Mr. O'Donnell.
So could we reduce that taxable amount we collect for a finite period of time and then move it back upward at our discretion, say a year or two from now?
I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, given the economy and some of the things as you mentioned earlier, not necessarily having a big project, stimulating, putting some dollars back into those other overlapping districts that might recharge their bank accounts a little bit may be something that's viewed very positively, by, Oregon City voters.
Thank you.
Mr. Graham.
Well, also, I've had the experience of managing several redevelopment areas. And the thing about the termination date, I'm going to ask a question to our consultants. There is a way, obviously, you can obviously identify a specific date to end the district, or you can actually identify conditions upon which an urban renewal district ends. Have you heard of establishing conditions by which the urban district ends? Have you heard that particular way of doing it?
Yeah, speaking for myself, I have not seen that done in Oregon, James. And thinking through, just reading through the statute or thinking through the statute, I cannot recall, any type of definition that, say, would lay that out as an alternative.
I would agree that is not done in Oregon. That's not been my experience. All of the districts I've worked in, both in Portland and out, all had end dates. And that's one of the negotiations when the Central East Side wanted to add 10 more years to their 20-year plan. That was negotiated and that was it. So I think it's an interesting concept, but I don't think it'll fly in Oregon under our legislation. And as a commissioner, I would support us having an end date because, as Commissioner O'Donnell said, all good things must come to an end. And even though we haven't had the time to do all of the work that we want to do with this district, I think it's something that we need to do because it's the right thing to do. And that will, I think, help us set our trajectory to make this work the way we all think that it should work. And I think that the one comment I would make about what Craig and John said, and I've had many discussions with both of them, it was very subjective. So the right projects, well, the right projects are the projects that get vetted, and they are the ones that will be put into the plan or revised in the plan. Those will be the right projects. So, and again, as I said, it's not a beauty contest.
Well, I just had that was only my I just had a question regarding the condition because I wasn't sure whether or not Oregon, whether or not that type of situation existed in Oregon, and you've answered that question. My last question deals with the rate of return. Obviously, a rate of return has to deal with time. So the shorter the time, the less rate of return. So that's an important consideration.
Yeah, let me clarify that maybe a little, James. I think the thing that's going to drive rate of return is increasing the taxable value. In time plays into that, but if you're right now, the district itself has been seeing growth over a long-term period of just under 4.9% annualized. Many of the districts we're seeing, that have, had really good success have been well over 6 to 7% annualized. And it is that annualized increase that ends up with rates of, ROI of 20+%. When you're down below 5, the ROI presently is about 16, 17%. The longer it goes out, if it stays at that rate, the less ROI, because you're picking up this increase from the early years when your growth on the frozen base, you were getting the benefit of that. But as that assessed value continues to increase, that frozen base bonus that you're getting is disappearing, if you will, becomes less and less significant. So yeah, the longer you go out without bumping up your annualized growth, the return on investment actually starts to go down.
All right. Where are we going next?
Well, we're going to a few of the things we've already touched on, but we're just going to run through some of these things, kind of the pros and cons of each one, and what some of those financial characteristics are. So really, when we talk about an alternatives analysis, we're talking about these three things that we just laid out in that kind of decision tree. So wanted to just revisit quickly the current district conditions. We've talked about many of these things. Much of the maximum indebtedness remains. We know that the city currently has $20 to $40 million of debt capacity it's sitting on. The current return on investment, as Andy said, 16%. There's 11% in there, but I think it's 16. And again, as Andy's mentioned, increasing the growth rate of the taxable growth will result in an increased return on investment by 2040. But we haven't had the return on investment projects that have been implemented. So sorry, my wife has just delivered me water, throw me off. So we've had tax increments increasing annually, as Andy mentioned, by 4.7, and 6% is typically desired by sort of other taxing districts. So with all that sort of being said, our first alternative here in terms of is retaining the district. So some of the core advantages are retaining the ability to address blight without raising taxes, the immediate ability to issue that $20 million of debt. You retain the state funding for school and other districts of 40 plus minus million. You don't lose school state funding that's currently plugging the gap. You close the district around 2042 as everything is planned out. The funding remains to clean up some of the more challenging sites, such as the landfill. And then upon closure, all things going well with a successful district, the districts receive more tax revenue than if not for urban renewal. The disadvantages of this include needing to secure voter approval for the district, potentially, and the plan. And then the overlapping taxing districts receiving a reallocation of taxes in approximately fiscal year 2043. So the follow-up to that is this matter of retaining and refreezing the frozen base. And so, as Andy mentioned, we ran a scenario here which looked at increasing by approximately half of the frozen base to current levels. And what that would mean is that the overlapping taxing districts would receive about $1.3 million plus or minus annually in redirected taxes every year. That would include about 500,000 to the city. There's no change in school funding to this. Regardless, the school district would receive a greater allocation of tax revenue from the urban renewal authority in the city, but no more funding generally. Again, you retain the ability to address blight and clean up brownfields and challenging sites. You still have a debt capacity of $20 million, but you put it off by about a year. But in that time, you have a little bit of time to refine the plan, look at projects, look at the vision. The disadvantages of this, you're deferring funding to address some of those immediate issues. It defers funding from the state that's currently making up some of those gaps there. You actually extend the urban renewal agency or authority rather by about 3 years. So previously it was 2042, now it's 2045. And you may still need to go out and secure voter approval to issue debt. Now, the last thing we looked at here is the pros and cons and financial implications of closing the district. So if you close the district, redirected taxes go back to the overlapping taxing districts. That includes $1 million back to the city. Now, it is the simplest option, but that's not necessarily a good reason to forego all of these other things. Disadvantages: you lose that $40 million that's currently being up for by the state. There's no additional funding to the schools. Options to address blight are greatly reduced. You still have those challenging properties, and your taxable assessed growth is unlikely to increase at a rate that if it were not for urban renewal. So that's pretty much that's the long and the short of it. We're happy to talk more about that, and you can probably speak a little bit more to some of the specifics, financials and the analysis that you ran. But let's pause.
Urban Renewal Commissioner Frank O'Donnell, you have your hand up.
Yeah, as initially presented, I misunderstood something Sam said. I was wondering, I mean, as I understand it currently, the Urban Renewal Fund is at a zero. I mean, we are debt free at the moment. So I don't think we ever talked about increasing the frozen base. Is that what you meant to say? Increasing it? Because we talked about I see, increasing in the sense that we're giving money back to the taxing entities. Why would that extend our urban renewal by 3 years?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, the reason it would is it reduces the amount of money that you would be bringing into the district by roughly $1 million a year, or $1.5 million, I think it is, in year one, and that will take a little bit of time to make that back up, and it gets, it only takes 3 years overall to make up the money that's lost in the early years. Does that make sense?
Well, I look at it and I think about the number of options ahead of us. I mean, we could, I'll phrase it as you say, increase the frozen base or free up monies to the taxing entities. I think we have to be careful what we do in tandem. If we did both that and reduce the amount we collected, is that a double whammy kind of? I mean,
Yeah, the answer to that, I think, Commissioner, is if you adjust the frozen base, that becomes a permanent adjustment versus the scenario that you described of choosing not to levy your full authority. That becomes an annual kind of discussion point that you can choose to do, not do, or you can make a decision to make it a 5-year type of plan where you levy 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, ramp it back up to full capacity. You have a wide range of options if you didn't adjust your frozen base, but if you did refreeze your base, increase that becomes a permanent type of thing.
Okay, so to restate what you just said, not collecting the full amount that we're entitled to collect gives us the most flexibility, because once we adjust frozen base, we're locked in.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, I
That's what, and
still didn't understand your date. Since we don't have an end date, why are you saying it's long? I didn't understand that.
Oh, I'm sorry. With respect to the funding, you have about $105 million roughly of maximum indebtedness left. And based on your current growth and projecting that out, it'll take till 2042 approximately to generate that money to pay for projects. And if you increase the frozen base by roughly 100 million, that would take you an additional 3 years too.
Okay, I would suggest that you add that, because if you had said we'd need to adjust the maximum indebtedness, that made sense to me because I'm used to that term. But the way you phrased it with leaving that out, I was like, what? Okay. So it's tied to the maximum indebtedness, which, yes, it makes sense. Perfectly good sense now. So I think maybe adjust that chart a little bit. I can't see everybody else. So has anybody else got their hand raised? I'm going to move my gallery up and down here. Okay. All right. Commissioners, what is your pleasure?
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't get to my hand fast enough. I have a question. Sorry, can you put that slide back up? I have a question about the increase, the frozen base. In the disadvantages, you mentioned, I believe, may need to secure voter approval. Is that because we're changing the max indebtedness or related to the financial piece, or is that bullet in there for the same reason as the bullet in the retain the district, but they say two different things?
Yes, they are the same. They are the same thing. It's to do with the charter and the way that things currently stand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that may need to secure voter approval. That's essentially an optional item.
Yes.
Whereas the other ones are more factual. Okay.
Anything else? Where would you like to go with this? I'm not sure we may or may not be in a position to be making any decision, but I guess the suggestion I would make is, with concurrence by Mr. Conkle, is that focus on a direction we want to go to, and look at how we can refine our comments into something that we can move forward with. I can't see Tony at the moment, so there he is. I think, Doug, did you have your hand up for something?
He does.
Doug?
Yes.
That was my hand.
Okay.
Covered my face, so I thought that would indicate I wanted to speak. I'd like a bit of information on the terms of closing sections of the district. Would it be possible, as you might recall, when I was interviewed, I expressed interest in closing much of the Main Street portion because so much is invested there, and that's where we saw, I think, a fair amount of increase in the values. How much revenue does that bring in, and what would be the impact of closing that section relative to the overall amount that we get? I'd like that for a future item.
Well, as you know, with any downtown district, the work is never really done. I would have to say that I would not support that, only because we have some ability to do some upper story redevelopment, which is going to require assistance and support. There's a workshop that's going to be coming up that's going to be led with some of the property owners downtown to look at upper story redevelopment, and having done seismic loans and grants, that is a significant help to that type of a project. So again, you keep refreshing. That's why you see Portland downtown always be not tore up from the riots, but you know, it's constantly evolving and changing before everything starts getting trashed down there. But you keep helping your downtowns, keep putting some investment in it, because there's always something that needs to be refreshed. And again, it's like hitting your refresh button on your computer. It's a growth opportunity that just doesn't stay stagnant.
Well, I understand the desire for seismic improvements. A lot of that's masonry construction.
It's mostly all of it.
Yeah, so I can understand that, but I don't know if we've actually made any kind of stressing that particular funding going forward.
Well, I will be suggesting it, mind you.
Okay. The question, though, I think the question is still a legitimate one.
Yes, no, I'm not saying we're not going to answer. I'm just saying.
Just wanted to ask how much the urban renewal district would be losing in terms of income if it did that. That's all I'm going to ask.
No, it's okay. That's fine. Mr. Conkle, can you shed some light here?
I don't know if he'd be able to do that now.
No, I'm not asking him to answer the question, your question. I was asking him to respond to my question about where we should go with next steps. Was my assessment correct, or is there another option?
I guess, are the urban renewal commissioners, you know, I'm not sure, is there enough information here to begin discussing on how you'd like to move forward? Are there things that are missing that you need more information on? So I think we're to the point of, if there's enough information, really, it's where would we like to go? Is it a shut down the district? Is it a keep the district as it is, amend the plan? Is it somewhere in between there? I think it's getting back to one of Sam's original charts of kind of the decision-making process here as to, are you comfortable with the work that's been done up to this point? Do you have enough information to begin deliberating and providing direction on which way we would like to go next?
Thank you. You did characterize what I asked. I'm not sure if it was Doug or Urban Renewal Commissioner / Mayor Rachel L. Smith. So I'll go ahead, since Doug doesn't have a hand up, I'll take Doug, Rachel, and then Frank.
I guess the difficulty I'm seeing is, what do we want to do in the district? You brought up the seismic thing. I understand that. I don't know if that's in a something that we in fact want to direct our funding to. If that's the case, I wouldn't have any problem with keeping that area open. But I think we have to be specific in terms of how we want those monies to be spent within those pieces, within those particular segments of the urban renewal district. Because if we don't have something specific we want to do, I don't see how we can justify not closing the segments.
Doug, that's the question that I just had Tony recharacterize. What are we willing to move forward with? Are we at a point to where we want to give some direction to say, yes, no, here's the middle? Obviously I'd like to have us redraft the plan, put it in a bit different format, but that's just me. So
I guess if I could just jump in real quick, Commissioner Neely, and I don't want to step too far out in front of Andy and Sam here, but the district, we kind of think about it over the entirety of the plan. So while some investments are made earlier on that increase value more quickly for certain buildings, That's where you get some of that assessed value revenue generation that helps pay for either the indebtedness over the length of the district or future projects. So let's just say we took Main Street from 10th to 5th to 99E. There were significant investments made both in Main Street with urban renewal funds, 99E with urban renewal funds, as well as storefront grants, which, while it wasn't the large brand new business that brought in a quick increase in assessed value, there was significant assessed value incrementally in those businesses through both external storefront grants as well as some of the internal work that happened. So essentially you take those out and you're left with the properties that are still blighted and undervalued, now trying to pay for that district over the long term. And the ones where you've already made the investment are taken out of that equation. So my gut says, most of our investment has been in that core area, and that's where we've probably seen the most increase in assessed value over time. You take that out, I think those numbers are going to change.
No, and that's why I asked for an actual accounting.
Number account.
What was there? Yeah.
Mayor Smith?
Thank you. So I think I have one question which is separate from my comments on what we should do next. So my question is for Sam or Andy. If hypothetically we were to close the district, does that have any effect on the properties that the urban renewal district owns and what we would do with them? What would happen with those in that scenario? Anything other than the fact that we own them and could still do something with them? Or
so if we shut down the entire district, just shut it down, urban renewal?
if we pick the close the district option, but the urban renewal agency still owns properties, what would happen? I just don't know that scenario. What would happen with those properties? Anything, or is it just like we still own the properties and the district, whether being open or closed, doesn't have any effect on those properties?
I think they're transferred to the city, aren't they, Andy?
Yeah.
Or they're
Yes.
sold?
Yeah,
Yes.
you would transfer them over to the city.
Okay. All right. I didn't know what the answer was on that, so I was curious. I guess I'll say I do feel like I think I have enough information to at least start moving in a direction, and I'll say where I'm at right now is that I think we need to refresh urban renewal, update the plan, have a relook at the project list. Some of the stuff that we've talked about, Commissioner McGriff's idea about seismic retrofitting buildings downtown, whatever. I think those minor amendments I'm all in support of. My concern is the timeline to do all that work and taking another 2 years, to actually do all that work and get our feet under us. I would be concerned about, again, taking more time and not actually developing projects and getting a return on the investment. And so because I feel like we heard from some of the taxing districts that we've been sitting on this for so long, I'm in favor of maybe resetting the base to help those taxing districts out, like the fire district and others who could use the reset. And then I wouldn't feel so bad about then taking another 2 years of redoing the plan and coming up with our project list and coming up with our vision, because it's easy for us to say we want to do that, but I still think that's going to take some time. And so haven't forgotten the fact that those districts are kind of like, you guys have been sitting on it and not doing anything, and you're holding us stagnant. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
Did you mean, I don't think you meant redoing the base, but weren't you talking, did you hear what Commissioner O'Donnell asked about if we don't collect as much and we give some back? Because once we mess with that base, it's set forever. We can't change it. If we don't collect as much money and we give some, we have the ability to make adjustments in that. It's much more flexible. And I would like to see us stay as nimble as we possibly can without putting us in this square to say, this is it and that's all we can do. Because once we've done that, as Andy said, we're done.
Well, I think we still have flexibility. It just changes. It just resets the tax base. So we still have flexibility on projects that we go after. We still have plenty of debt and that we could, you know.
Not as much, but I'm pointing to square that Paul Lindman sits in. That would be Commissioner O'Donnell.
Well, as stated, the district has been underperforming. And when you start getting that 4% plus rate, there's a lot of critics that will say, well, by state law, which allows a maximum 3% increase, you're going to get 3% no matter what. So I understand that statement. I also understand what City Manager Conkle said. If we remove those most improved components of the district, my presumption is that those monies, that TIF that was generated would then be redistributed to the taxing entities. Is that correct? Okay, so we agree on that. I'm not sure, are seismic upgrades a valid expenditure for urban renewal dollars? Does anybody know? That you feel they are, Sam? Okay.
We did it.
Okay. All right, I just want to verify.
Yeah, it is.
So I also want the maximum flexibility. I hesitate to change the frozen base because it does lock us in. But I do feel a temporary reduction of our collection rate would earn us a lot of goodwill with our critics until such time, and it gives us the ability to go back to that rate once we establish some projects, because the project-based thing, and as the mayor said, it looks like to the general public, we're collecting money and doing nothing with it. But if we could turn around after a period of time and say, we reduced it during the time we weren't doing anything, now we're ready to do again, you know, maybe we suffer from a lag in collections, but at least it gains us the goodwill of some of our most vocal critics. And I still am in favor of a termination date. And apparently that's a minor thing that we can do at any point. Because I feel you either accomplish the goal or the district closes and you reopen a new district, which may even encompass part of the old. So those are my thoughts on it. But those are my thoughts alone. Thanks.
Urban Renewal Commissioner Rocky Smith.
So I feel pretty much the same way as already been said. I feel definitely we need to keep the option open and keep the district open. I feel that we need to re-look at kind of what our plan is for the district and readjust that, figure out kind of what our priorities are. I think I'm definitely leaning towards focusing on smaller projects and smaller successes that lead to the bigger projects and bigger successes. I think we owe that to the community to start showing, you know, some progress. So I think that also is the same point in trying to, you know, maybe take a pause and have some of that money go back into the community while we're reassessing that goal. But and I don't mind having that conversation that Commissioner Neely brought up. I will say that as long as I've been on the commission, the focal point has been using urban renewal for residential downtown. That's been the #1 focus. That's why the Cove apartments were, or that's the Cove project was part of it, and the upper floors of the buildings were part of it. I then looked to the concerns that I have about empty buildings. You know, we've done a lot of fixing up of the buildings, but we're going to have a lot of empty buildings. We're going to have an empty courthouse at some point. Those are all things I think we really need to consider in that discussion about whether or not downtown stays in or out. Part of one of the reasons we didn't focus on the upper floors of the empty upper floors for residential was because we didn't have a financial way of dealing with the quiet zone. That could be something dealt with urban renewal. So for all those reasons, I think that discussion should be something we have. But I would love to see us start on our small properties in the downtown and work our way out towards the bookend or one of the bookends and see some progress. So that's kind of my take on it at this point. So I hope, you know, we have a more more discussions about that and really how to hone in on a vision that we want. And if we come up with a vision and kind of show some, reaching out to the community in that process, I think that'll go a long way.
I'm going to call on Commissioner Cross.
I don't know. I'm probably leaning toward keeping the district open more I'm probably the only one that's thinking more as it is. I mean, change the project list, clean it up a little bit, but I don't think touching the base, touching the rate. I think right now there isn't any money in the district. If we want to do projects, we own a property, I think it's at 12th and Main. We have a property that the landscaping zone. We have the little property right at the bottom of Singer Hill. We could use those funds, go out with we could do projects that we don't have to wait for developer or, the property owners to actually do things. There are things we can actually do. We could actively start doing some projects and some good, maybe increase the TIF a little bit. But so that's kind of where I think I'm really leaning. I don't know. I mean, there is a list. I mean, there's tweaking some of it. I kind of agree with Commissioner Smith, Rocky Smith, about the quiet zone. I think that would be a great something. It's not on the list, but it's something we could add. I mean, but I think that would help out a lot. I definitely wouldn't want to move any properties like Commissioner Neely wanted, because for the exact reasons of you have that tax base that's now built in on those properties, and that's what's actually going to pay for the rest of the district. You do that, it's just like raising up the frozen base, because you move those off, they come off the frozen base, you add some other properties onto the frozen base. It's where they move on that year. It's not where they were in 1986 or 2007 when the plans were done. So I would not want to move too many properties that we don't need to move. But that's kind of where I'm leaning.
Thank you. Mr. Neely. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think I basically agree. As long as we can focus on doing the things that we bring forward, more projects are on Main Street. And seismic improvements, I think, is a great one. And maybe they can be tied into having residential in the upper stories too.
Well, that was my thought to suggest that we add that. What I would like to suggest is that we can discuss this to death, but I think we all have a way to move forward. And I would say that while discussion is merited that we have discussion about it, I think we also need to look at making sure that we have an actionable plan. I know that our staff is working on some documents for us to take a look at to possibly revamp our vision. I think it would behoove all of us to get copies of the current urban renewal plan and, maybe take your red pen and look at things that you'd like to see adjusted or changed. And let's continue moving this forward. I'd say, we have a lot of important work to do as commissioners, but I think in terms of where we need to go, and we're getting ready to get into budget season, this is paramount, I think, for our economic survival and our economic development of our community. And I don't at all disagree with you, Commissioner Smith, in terms of, small projects do pay off. I will say, without looking too sheepish, I think the base that we've created with the downtown projects is the gift that keeps on giving. And we need it to leverage the other things that we want to do. And that's why we need to look at our properties, come up with a RFP, RFQ, however we want to do this, and do this. I don't want one more person to knock on Tony's door and say, hey, I've got a great idea for your properties. I want Tony to be able to say, hey, we've got a great idea for our properties. Wouldn't you like to come to Oregon City and work with us and redevelop it? So Tony, do you have enough direction?
Well, I think Commissioner Lyle Smith's hand was up. I'm not sure if you saw it on your screen. I don't know if she wanted or if
It went away, and I saw it for like a second, and then it went away. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment. I mean, I support what Commissioner Cross said of if we want to keep the district as it is. I just want us to get moving. I think we've been sitting around and twiddling our thumbs and it hasn't helped our community. And so if we're all in agreement and we can get something going and focus on our properties and get moving, then great. But my concern is that, you know, we're going to work on plans and rewrites and all that, and we're going to get bogged down in government, you know, action and hiring consultants and doing all this work, which tends to drag things out. So I'm not saying, you know, so I'll leave it at that. I agree with Commissioner Smith. I think we could get some real nice properties and use our properties, get them going. I'm just concerned about government processes, and that's the main reason. I know these things tend to take a lot longer than we think they're.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. That's what I was saying, is that I think we can do both. The plan, you know, again, this is my opinion only. The plan in its current configuration is only partially workable. There's some tweaks that need to happen. That doesn't mean that we cannot move simultaneously with looking at our properties. Let's say we want to focus on property X, and we give direction to staff to come up with, here's what we think that this is the best thing. Again, I don't like using highest and best use as a planner. I find that an archaic term. It does not mean that it's the highest and best, but we need to look at and say, property X, it's zoned X, we've got this latitude. Let's see if we can find a developer that can help us execute that vision. We can still tweak the plan. We can do that. I'm optimistic enough. And again, I can see Tony going, staff time, without getting into a lot of bureaucratic red tape or bogging us down. That's why I said I wanted to get a consensus of where we're moving. I think we've got a consensus, and let's see if we can move that forward. And, you know, by the end of, you know, summer, we should have something we could put on the, you know, put out to say, or even before that, to put out to say, okay, we've got property X. We'd like to see who's interested in developing it with us. So is there anything else? Do we have anything else you want to add, Mr. Conkle?
I think we had Commissioner O'Donnell's hand up for a little bit.
Commissioner O'Donnell, please let me not forget you. I would never forgive myself.
I forgive you. I know we want to demonstrate a success. I know we want to, and I agree with Commissioner Smith. I mean, it's easier to bring on a smaller scaled project than a larger one. We're also trying to balance that success in a smaller project with avoiding a piecemeal approach. I honestly, and I know it's not popular, but I can't tell you how many times it's been difficult to get parking in downtown. And if somehow we could work in a parking structure there, and I know it's not a favored project, but I think its impact on economic development will be much larger than the parking structure itself. And again, I'm saying put it on the north and more toward the north or central part of town, so that I can't tell you how many times I've had to go back up on the heights and take the elevator to go downtown. So how much business do we lose because of that? So I agree with the smaller approach, maybe combining a couple small projects, demonstrate a success. I'm trying to listen to the community also, but the question is, what's the time frame to put forth something of that nature so that we can go forth to the community with a project-based approach? Thanks.
So Commissioner, Minister Conkle, I'm having a flashback right now to the fact that we did try to buy a property downtown during my employment tenure with the city. And we had a very nervous commission at the time, which was all city commissioners, no citizens on the urban renewal, and they refused to purchase it. It would be done and built by now, but be that it may, hopefully I won't have PTSD over that, because it's every time I go by that piece of property, I think about what could have been. And so I want to try to focus on what can be.
So I think based on the conversation that I've heard, I think James and I and the team need to kind of go back and come back to the commission with what we think we've heard in terms of potentially keeping the district. We're going to look at refreshing the plan and the projects. There may or may not need to be a discussion about what the rate being charged is for a year or two. It sounded like pretty 50-50-ish, if so, not that it was an official vote, just kind of what I was hearing, but that's something that we can look at. And then, you know, I guess concurrently with that, we own properties. And do we want to invest in, let's say, an architecture firm that says 12th and Main, we envision this, and here are some of the development costs, and put the, I mean, so we could bring that back as an option to think about in terms of trying to do both the property part and the plan update concurrently. And then if we decide we don't want to, we want to do the plan only, or the plan's going to take a different form as these details come out, we can certainly do that. But I guess that's what I see as the next step, is something to bring back to the commission based on what I've heard. So if there's something else or a different direction, let us know, or does that sound like something you want us to bring back?
Well, you're pretty close. I think that we as commissioners need to have somewhat of a vision in our head about what we want to do with our properties, which is why I asked for us to each make sure we all had a copy of it. Is it still online?
The existing plan? Yes.
So it's online, so we should take a look at that. I think eventually we may want to have somebody help us craft what that vision is, but I don't think we're ready. I'm not ready for it right now, and I'm not willing to turn that over to somebody to say, well, here's what we think. I'd like to know what we think about the possibilities before I have an architect or someone that we feel comfortable with coming and drawing a vision. Because again, we need to have the vision on and words on paper, and then we go out and talk to some, people come in and say, here's how we think we can implement your vision.
So don't do any specific property work, just focus on the plan.
Well, the plan includes the properties in my mind. So again, I'm asking the commissioners to think about each of the properties that we own, which are in the plan, and let's, have a brief discussion about what their ideas are, 10th and Main, 12th and Main, Washington Street. Everybody's got great ideas, and I've heard some of them already from just general conversation or casual conversation. And I think we have the ability to be visionary and think about what options would be available. The zoning is very flexible. There's a lot of things, but again, not to criticize anybody, but I know our vision at 12th and Main was not to have a mattress store. So Rocky's shaking his head. Commissioner Smith and then Commissioner O'Donnell.
So I guess I don't want to have this, conversation and the plan and, take a ton of time. But I think we do need to know, one of the basic questions that came up tonight that's clear that we need to know before we even start dealing with individual properties is residential a priority? It's always been, I thought, since I've been on the Urban Renewal Commission. That's a main question I think we need to know, because when we started talking about the lot at the bottom, of Singer Hill, it all came down to that. We bought that piece of property for residential in the upper story, and that's what it's, we've always kind of envisioned being there. If that's not what we envision being there anymore, then it doesn't, make any sense to kind of do that and focus on it. So I think that needs to be some general themes that we said, what is really the focus? And I think that can be done without a huge amount of time. But, and I think, if a project comes up that fits that general, vision, we might be able to approach it. But I would like to kind of think of those properties as a whole and kind of how they work together. I just don't want to delay it for a long time. I think we need to move, and we need to move pretty quickly, but we need to do it very we need to plan for, and I want to say specifically the landscaping site, I think is one of the things we really need to be careful about how we plan that. You know, and how that connects. We've focused on downtown. We now are seeing infill that's connecting what we kind of always have referred to as the north end of Main Street and what we would call the lower Washington. We're seeing things happen, you know, in that district that is starting to tie Main Street to the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, and we're going to see more of that coming. We need to focus on that. We need to focus on that connection so that the projects that are coming at the dump site and the cove are at a high level that really fit into our vision, that we're kind of stepping out and saying, this is what we want this to look like. But I also think that conversation of the parking garage is crucial, because if that is a priority that we want to focus on, you know, we've talked about that in several areas. Do you want that right in the center of your downtown? Do you want that at the north end? Do you want it right off the freeway? When people pull off the freeway, they get to a parking garage and then they take some other shuttle into Main Street, connecting the two bookends that we've always talked about. I mean, those are general concepts that we really, I think, need to know before we start piecing those individual properties, because it's going to have to work together in the next 5 or 10 years and add to what we expect to find at the fall site. So I think, you know, how do we do that and how do we envision that without taking like a year or two to envision that? I think we need to do, and that's not an easy thing. But I think we do need to have a vision. We need to move quick, and we need to show the public that we're ready to move, and we don't want to sit here and wait.
I think we said that.
I do too. I think we're on the same page.
I think we just said it again. Commissioner O'Donnell. That's something.
I actually agree with everything Commissioner Smith just said. It's interesting. When Sam first opened up, his number 2 statement was the goals of a UR were commercial and employment. And employment is something that was stated earlier by Commissioner Neely way back when. But I've always believed in residential, and I believe a downtown residential component makes it a much more vibrant city. And actually, I was just walking around a place called Seaside a few weeks ago, and I looked at their upper stories, and it made me think of Oregon City, what we should be doing, establishing that upper city residence. So I do think it makes it a more vibrant downtown. And of course, maybe a parking structure would contribute to that, because if you got residents, they need places to park, and they could maybe get involved with that. I don't know if we abandoned the discussion of a potential end date on this plan, because again, project-based and end dates were critical components of our most vocal critics. I don't know, are we going to talk about potentially establishing an end date, or is that?
I don't know if we're going to talk about it tonight, but it's on the list, and I think we need
to.
We need some financial information in order to do that, and I don't know whether Matt's shop is capable of pulling some of that out, or whether we need to talk to a bond counsel. But yes, we need some financial information in order to make that decision, because we want to make the best possible decision with the best possible information. That's would be my way of thinking about how we need to go with that.
Yeah, unless my memory is failing me. Also, I said we're at zero indebtedness, and I thought we had $3 million in the coffers, and I'm not sure if that's correct or not.
James?
You do.
Yeah, I think we did. I nodded yes to the answer. So, okay, I think we've got a direction, and I'm cognizant of the time. And again, this is a special meeting that we asked for, mostly asked for, and I want to try to be conscientious about people's time. We've got we put out a lot of good discussion, a lot of good information, and I think we have a path forward. And I'm getting goosebumps because I'm getting excited about this again. And I really think that we have a path forward. And I don't want to criticize any of our past commissions. They made decisions based on the information that they had at the time. And, sometimes as Tony knows, as staff, we don't always agree with our commission, but it is we're dealing with the deck that we have. And, you know, I can coulda, shoulda, woulda, all, you know, all I want to about things that we could have done or should have done. But I think we have a path forward, and I feel really encouraged by that. I feel that we have a solid base to move forward on. And I think our job will be to talk to our community members and explain to them that, you know, there's a new sheriff in town, and we are looking at this as a tool that will benefit our community. And, you know, regardless of what happened in the past, we are moving forward. And I think that's the message that we need to impart, just exactly what Mayor Lyle Smith said. We are moving forward. We are being proactive. And that is something that I think is, to quote several of our commissioners, something that's been a long time coming. And we have, I believe we are united in that we are moving this forward. So unless Mr. Conkle has anything else, or Mr. Graham, I want to thank Sam and Andy and Anise for sticking it out with us again, and for coming on tonight. Thank you, Matt. And again, thank you for the package that I received this afternoon.
I guess I would just like to kind of clarify here what the expectation is. So what I'm hearing is wanting to relook at the plan. So we're going to come back with how that would happen, not necessarily what's in it, right? We kind of dived into whether it's parking structures or second floor residential, or, you know, focusing on kind of in between downtown and the landfill. You know, I think those are all great conversations that come out of a process putting it together. So what I'm hearing is that we want to refine the plan, and to create the vision, create the project list, update the plan. And I understand the desire to move fast, but what is the expectation on a public participation component to that?
My expectation is that, so I'm going to put out a little warning. So read the urban renewal plan, y'all. There will be a test. I think the expectation is that at our next full meeting, where we have not stuff ahead of the city commission meeting, that we have urban renewal only, that we talk about that. I think that there is a way that we can utilize existing processes to bring the public into our discussion, to let them know where we are going and maybe outline a path forward. We don't have everything fleshed out at this time, but we have some major key points that we are looking at that they can help us with that. Does that make sense? Frank's looking up at the ceiling.
Well, I raised my hand too. I was looking for divine guidance.
It's coming. It's coming.
My hand is up.
I think there's a couple components to this, and here's what bothers me. In the end, you know, the last election, 27% of the electorate voted, so 1 out of 4. So this is going to fall to us to set the initial direction. And yeah, we're going to engage, but in the end, we're going to put something in front of people and say, this is what we'd like to do. And when you talk about public participation, you want to talk about public participation, it's called the vote. You put something on the ballot and say, would you support the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission doing this project? And that's public participation. So don't look for a lot from the general public, because by and large, they're not going to be engaged until we put something specific in front of them. Thanks.
I'm glad you feel confident. I'm not that confident of putting anything on a vote that would generate interest, but that's just me. Mr. Neely, you had your hand up.
No, I think his
hand.
Yeah, his point is a good one. I'm not talking about putting it to a vote. No matter how you put it out to public, we have to have something to present to them. I don't think we have to go through these big sessions that we had earlier on, trying to get everybody's idea what should happen down there. We need to make some specific presentations to the public.
Yes.
I'm not neutral on taking it to a vote. I have preferences not to do it. But I think if we have something put together to the public, we can get their input. If we find out there are things that are problematic that the public is picking up, we can make modifications. But we have to put something forward to them.
Yes.
All right.
And I guess, the other component is that we do have we have one existing charter limitation that any indebtedness needs to go to a vote of the people that has not been challenged. And then we have the existing litigation of which we're waiting for the Court of Appeals decision, which, next year, 9 months. So we're gonna have to have a discussion about that.
Yeah, I
And
know.
how do we want to move forward related to that issue?
I was just gonna say the same thing. We need to discuss how we're gonna move forward. I just feel uncomfortable about stagnating while we wait for that to happen. It's not helping the community. And I think we have a little bit of leeway without somebody coming down on us. I mean, we get enough flack for not doing anything. And we are doing things. I mean, it's beyond my comprehension to explain to you how supportive of this commission I feel. And that's kind of where we are. All right.
James.
One more.
Anything that I missed or that you wanted to add, or Sam? Andy, Anise?
I would just say that vision is very important. And as we're working on not only working on documents to help you with the vision, but also a framework for making decisions on projects. Because usually that framework includes a bond counsel, a financial analysis, those type of things that encompass, that are utilized to look at projects and then make a recommendation to a commission. So a framework to make decisions is also important. And no matter what the project is, there needs to be a systemic approach to this.
All right. If there's nothing else, I will request that we have a consensus on adjourning, or somebody can make a formal motion.
I agree. Let's reserve.
Rachel, thumbs up. All right. So we are now officially decided as a group that we will adjourn. And as I said before, thank you, staff. Thank you, Leland Consulting. Thank you, 3J Consulting staff. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Katie. And I think we got a lot of good work done tonight. Thank you so much. And I will look forward to seeing you all at 6 o'clock on Wednesday for the next Urban Renewal Commission meeting.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.